Saul and Battery, hosted by Mel and Kelly.
And Mike.
Forget what you know. Forget what you know. Saul and Battery.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Saul and Battery. I'm Kelly Toole at KELLYTHUL on Twitter.
And I am Mike at Official Pagan on just about everything.
We apologize for the delayed start, but as I mentioned on Twitter, Mike and I were reading to the orphans, and it takes a little while to complete Game of Thrones, but the kids seem to enjoy it.
It's true. They were really riveted by the Red Wedding.
Yeah, it went over well, I thought, in general. So we're excited to get going on season 3 of Better Call Saul. We're going to kind of stick with some of the format stuff we tried to introduce last year, which includes the 1-minute recap, which I'll talk about a little more in a second. But and then we're working on some sync communication issues with Mel. Hopefully we get those kind of sorted out and have her join us, even though that really will, put our hands full, because she can get a little rowdy, and Mike and I have to kind of reel her in all the time. But we're super hopeful we can kind of get some things worked out, and Mel will be joining us soon.
It's true, but I mean that's the risk we took taking on someone from a 1% motorcycle gang.
Yeah, we went in with eyes wide open, so that's the way it goes.
I think the first show we ever did with her back in the Snarkalic radio days, she was like, "Hey, you want some meth?" And I cried.
Yeah, curled in a fetal position for the next 3 shows, if I recall. So it's a little rough. Okay, so what we will do is we will start with the 1-minute recap. Now, I did not get this approved by Mike, and I don't intend to at this point in time, but this was actually a longer episode. It was actually 1 hour and 10 minutes. So I think I should be allowed 1 minute and 10 seconds, if required, to get through the 1-minute recap for this week. And I will afford you similar latitude, Mike, should you get a longer running episode.
It's funny. When you said you were going to make some sort of adjustment to it, for whatever reason, I thought we were going to go shorter, like a 30-second recap.
That would be tough. That would really, really be tough. Okay. I'm going to give it a go here. We're using very, very high-end technology, as hopefully the folks can see, with the clock. So I'm going to go ahead and get things started and get rolling. Okay. So we open up in black and white. Saul out in Omaha, and they're playing Sugartown, and there's a much more crowded Cinnabon than I think is actually true. A kid tries to steal something, and eventually Saul faints because he turned him into the cops and felt bad about it. We then come back after the commercial, and Jimmy and Chuck are actually bonding. We picked up right where we left last season. We're moving all the stuff down. But as they seem to kind of be getting along better, Chuck reminds them that he's still in deep water. Kim's practicing elder law. Howard plays the tape that he recorded of Saul, or Jimmy rather, and he wonders what Chuck's going to do with it. And Chuck says, "I've got an idea," and twirls his mustache maniacally. But we cut back to Mike, which also picks up from last year. He's searching his car, can't find anything, takes the whole thing apart, tells the junkyard to keep it, eventually finds something in the gas cap. We come back, Jimmy's in his office, and the Air Force guy shows up grouchy. Then Mike pulls the cap off of his car. And then we come back, and the criminal vet shows up, and Mike orders something from the criminal vet. Kim's rocking it at Mesa Verde, does a fantastic job of obsessing over everything she does, commas, dashes, and etc. Ernesto hears the tape of what Jimmy confessed to, and Chuck tells him he can't say anything, and I wonder if that's really true. And then finally, Mike drains the tracker and ends up tracking the guy who comes to pick it up. And I guess Haven't stretched out the muscles, even with I went over even my bonus 10 seconds. But there you go. So it was a minute 30 recap. Sorry, folks.
I mean, I think you did a great job. I could have done it in 30 seconds, but hey, that's just me.
Well, the good news for you is you'll have an opportunity next show. See how it goes. Although both you and Mel did a lot better at this than me, and I even kind of tried to take reduced notes, and I still failed. But we'll.
It honestly, it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. Like going into it, I was like, minute recap, that's nothing. And then once you actually do one and have to get through that in a minute, it's much more difficult than you think it's going to be.
Most definitely. Okay, so the show, top line reaction. So we're back. What did you think, Mike?
I really enjoyed it. I particularly, there's two things I want to talk about this particular episode. It's the present day Saul and his Cinnabon, and then the end when Mike is tracking the tracker. Those are the two things that really caught me on this episode. Overall, I really liked it, but those two things really stuck out for me. What about you?
So I also really enjoyed it. I think the 2 points that you made are both really good in terms of good ones to go in. The other thing I'd be interested in your theory of is what is Chuck's plan? What does he have?
So I had a joke about this that I was going to go into with this. I'm not sure for legal reasons that I'm allowed to say it.
Okay. And always disturbing when you're showing restraint, because that means that what's out there is significant. All
right, so here's what I'm gonna kind of like deconstruct this joke, and people can go and put it together themselves. So I know you are, but for the purposes of our lovely listeners, do you know who plays Chuck Kelly?
I do.
So you know of a musical project that he's involved with, correct?
I do.
That musical project is currently embroiled in a real-life legal battle with very, very high financial stakes.
That I did not know.
Yes, and I can't say too much about it because the record company they're in this legal battle with happens to be the record company that Pagan is on.
And doesn't Pagan have something coming up, Mike?
Yeah, we do. I wasn't going to use this to plug myself, though. So, I'm not that kind of guy. I'm not going to talk about Dead Girls Part 1 coming out. But I will say that I wanted to make a joke about, juxtaposing his evil plots with his real-life legal battle, but I probably shouldn't do that. But go look that up. It's crazy that the numerical values that are being attached to his real-life legal battle. Go look that up. Put the joke together yourself.
Wow. So that's good. So we gave you folks a little bit of homework, what I'm going to certainly be doing. So that's very cool. All right. So let's talk about Black and White Jimmy, or I guess Black Gene, the man of many names.
Yeah, right.
Gene.
First off, and this is a weird minor quibble, and maybe you can clear this up for me because you live in the Midwest. I live on the East Coast. Cinnabons are basically like mall kiosks here. Like it's a little stand in a mall. That was a Cinnabon like restaurant. We don't have that here.
So I'd share your quibble in that my Cinnabon experience has been confined to small mall kiosk types or very narrow shops in malls and airports. So I've never seen
same here.
Never seen quite the full service Cinnabon that's also incredibly busy based on the sped up motion there, which is fairly impressive. Good for them.
Yeah, it's quite the busy Cinnabon, and just size wise, and I know like we've seen the Cinnabon before, and I remember thinking that before, but for whatever reason, and maybe I'm wrong and I just didn't take proper note of it previously, I really feel like we saw the scope of the storefront area this time. And I didn't really understand before that this was apparently the world's largest Cinnabon.
Well, Gene's a player. He isn't going to go small. So I guess that's it. But so why do you think Gene fainted?
So that's an interesting thing. I loved that entire interaction with him and the police because you could see like not only everything he was going through in his head, like, is he going to be true to himself? Is he going to stay in character and do the right thing? But what I love, and this is honestly probably going to be like my quote, and it's not even an audible thing, when he points to the photo booth, he looks down at his own finger like it betrayed him.
Exactly. I mean, his he did so much with, you know, he had a couple lines in it which were good lines in it, but everything he did non-verbally, including that you've betrayed me finger, because it was like it did it without his controls. That was fantastic. And just his whole,
just the way it was a complete detachment from his own hand. Like it's such a subtle little funny moment, but it just shows his actual range as an actor, because that could have just come off as being like stupid slapsticky comedy, almost like a campy nod to the audience, and it didn't. It came off funny, but there's a sincerity to it. It shows how good an actor he really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of my favorite moments of the show. As we move out of that and kind of go into the next scene, you got Jimmy and Chuck. The title of this episode's Mabel. That was a book that Jimmy originally thought that his mother read to him, but Chuck was very quick to correct him and said, "No, I read it to you." But eventually, they started to actually have the first kind of pleasant dialogue you've seen between these two guys, I think, in the entire series. But Chuck caught himself and ended up being the jerk that he is by the end of it. And so that was all pretty good. And then poor Kim, man, she's gonna run herself into the ground. She's doing her job and taking on some of Jimmy's elder care folks, who in the recap, I missed a key fact that she was handling a very sensitive lily pad garden issue regarding a will, and I thought she handled that quite adeptly.
It is very interesting. So I laughed watching this because I'm currently listening to a podcast called S-Town. I don't know if you're familiar with this or not.
I'm not.
It is a short series, maybe 7 or 8 episodes, and I don't want to give anything away. And in fact, it may be a recommendation on a future Squat Cobbler. But there's an element now where they're talking about wills and things like that. And I was literally listening to that particular segment of the podcast right before I watched this episode. So it was funny listening to this, like hardline talk about wills and all this stuff, and then watch someone speak of a will in terms of a lily pad pond.
Yeah, again, just awesome scene. And Ray Seahorn was on the Hardwick did a talking Saul. I think he's going to do it for this one, and then the finale. And she was on, and I just really like her. she's a good actress, and she just seems like just such a genuine, fun person. So she's super cool.
I have a particular question for you about her because it's such a great character. She's doing such an excellent job portraying this character. How do you think, and maybe this is a little early, maybe I should have saved this for predictions, but where do you see the trajectory of her character going, and how is she going to fit into the backstory of Breaking Bad? Once the timeline reaches that point, is she still a part of it by that point?
So my hope would be that somehow, there's going to be a point where she and Jimmy clearly part ways. And my hope is that it's not a permanent parting of ways and that Kim's still alive. And maybe Gene ends up syncing up with Kim down the road, which would be a little storybook, but could be kind of cool. But I have a feeling this is, the Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul universe, that things may not, Kim, something bad happening to Kim may be that final catalyst that causes Jimmy to shed any of his finer qualities and become pure Saul. What are your thoughts?
Pretty much in line with you. I think something's happening to her, and I think that's going to be the final. Like what we're seeing now is like the slow dismantling of Jimmy, revealing the Saul underneath. And I think whatever little piece is left of the conscience that he's kind of holding on to, whatever is going to happen with Kim is going to be what pushes him over that edge. And into full on Saul.
Yeah, so I thought another addition, one I didn't run by you before the show. So I think the standard pieces, we'll do the 1 minute recap. We'll do our favorite quotes. One other new one I wanted to enter this year ties very much to Kim, and I think I'm gonna at the end of each episode, I think what we need to have is kind of the Kim Death Watch meter, and with one being she's the Emperor of Australia, because I think Australia is run by an emperor. I'm not sure. One is she's the Emperor of Australia, and 100 is she's absolutely pushing up daisies. And so we kind of run that number to what is the likelihood of us losing Kim, and I think we'll come up with a nice graphic to continue to show where we sit on there. And so we can kind of at the end of this show kind of say where do we feel. So like right now, it's like maybe she's okay, maybe she's not, maybe you're sitting at 50, that kind of thing. So we'll come to that at the end. But
my only concern with that is, and I am not a historian, so everything I know about Australia, I learned from the Mad Max films. I don't know how safe she is in Australia.
Well, I'm assuming, so I think Mad Max was a documentary. I'd have to go back and check.
Right.
But I think as Emperor or Empress of Australia, that those would actually be, that would be her color guard or the changing of the guards kind of folks, I think. But we can do some research on that to pin that down.
Makes sense. And that's what we do for our audience.
That's right. Deep, hard research, without a doubt.
It sounded creepy when you said it that way.
Yeah, I noticed. So sorry about that. You
even lowered your voice too. You're like,
yeah,
deep, hard research.
That's right. That could be a soundbite. So anyway, Chuck plays a tape for Howard. Howard's kind of like, I don't know what we can do with this because there's a lot of different angles Jimmy can take to knock it out. But Chuck is like, ha ha ha, I've got a plan. Do you have any sort of sense what that plan is?
I do not, and that's really where I was interested to kind of pick your brain. And again, maybe it's my own sort of juvenile take on it that when he was kind of talking about his plan and stuff, his real legal battle kind of popped into my head.
Yeah, it could be on his mind, that's for sure. No, well, when we get to the kind of last segment I've got, I'll add a little bit on there because I do have an idea, but we get some. I think we get a little bit of a tidbit at the end of the show, but we're going to have to see.
Well, I mean, if there's no, my only thing, I guess, is if there's no legal recourse in what they can do with it, obviously it's some sort of blackmail.
Yeah. Well, I think, and just to jump ahead to it, at the end when Ernesto hears the tape, Chuck's a pretty crafty guy, and I'd be really surprised. I don't know how that tape player could be on play when the batteries go in at that very particular point that's the most damning of the confession, unless Chuck wanted Ernesto to hear it because he knows that ultimately everyone loves Jimmy, so he's going to hear something, and he's trying to set it up so like Jimmy tries to come in and steal it, and that's the crime he gets Jimmy for. It's nothing to do with what's on the tape, but Jimmy breaking and entering into his house.
Interesting. I think that's a great theory, and it fits with the character.
Yep, I think it could be. We'll see. So Mike is being really crafty. He, is freaked out. He got that note that said "don't." Was convinced that there was, and did you? So I assumed immediately as he started going through and reaching underneath the wheel wells and everything, he was looking for a tracker. On Twitter, there seemed to be some folks that were confused, but to me, it was like, well, that's what he's doing.
Right. No, that's instantly what I took it as.
Yeah, and he did a very thorough search and tore the whole car apart and basically gave it to him. He had given up and was about to leave, and then the gas cap idea crossed his mind, and he went back, and sure enough, there was something in there. Later in the show, we see him, and I had a hard time following it. I got that he bought, the criminal vet showed up, and he bought a comparable tracker and tracking device from him. He had the exact model and make and all of that. And so he swapped it. So now that the one that was taken is the one he can track. But then I don't quite understand what he did with the one that was in his car. I guess he drained the battery, but he drained the battery by having it play a radio. I wasn't quite following that.
Yeah, I wasn't 100% on that one myself. I mean, I got that he was draining the battery. The radio part is where I was a little confused, unless there was some sort of audio device in the tracker. So playing the radio was just, covering all of his bases.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so
I mean, and I got no impression that there was an audio element to a tracker. So I don't know. That's just me grasping at straws there.
yeah, and I guess if you needed to somehow drain the battery in one of those things, and you can somehow have it powering a radio, that I guess that could do it. But
yeah, I mean, maybe that's all it was. Maybe it was just something convenient to put on. He needed some way to drain the battery. He wanted to listen to the radio. Maybe it's that simple, and we're just looking too deeply into it.
And the last part of this show I want to touch base on is, as much as I love Kim, think she's incredibly awesome. I do think she might be wound a little bit tight because I wasn't sure when she took all the files back from the Mesa Verde lawyer whether she was going to sabotage herself or not, but she just seems to be obsessing over the comma versus the semicolon versus double dashes and having every last thing be perfect. And she's really burning the candle at both ends. So I'm worried that her intensity to her job is not gonna bode well for her.
Possibly, and like we both said, unfortunately, I don't think her future is bright.
So speaking of it, we'll go to the Kimometer. Based on everything we saw in this show, it's again, scale of 1, she's the Empress of Australia with her Mad Max contingent of guards. To 100, she's stone cold, underground, pushing up daisies, etc. 50 is could be either way. Where's your Kimometer for after episode 1 of season 3?
So I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure she could be all the way at the bottom as Empress of Australia, because I feel relatively confident that even if she's safe at the moment, there is that black cloud hanging over her.
Yeah, I don't see her getting into the single digits anytime soon on the Kimometer. I'd probably, based on today, particularly with the obsession stuff, I'm gonna put her at 55 for
yeah, that sounds about. I was gonna say 50. Because with the obsession part, like maybe she's more of a danger to herself in this episode, but I think there's very real danger coming for her, and like we both said, that's going to be what pushes Jimmy into full on Saul. That's going to be the last straw.
So we'll find a way to kind of better document the Kimometer and share it, and maybe do a little bit of a blog post explaining the scale and some other things there. And if we do that, tweet that out to Ray, because she's actually fairly interactive on Twitter and might even get a little bit of a chuckle out of it. We'll see. So, all right, favorite quote of the show?
My favorite quote is actually the looking at his finger. And before you argue that that's not a quote, one of my favorite films, and I discussed it on our friend Dylan's show, Dylan Knows, is Showgirls. And I constantly quote Showgirls in everyday life. My favorite quote from that movie is actually where a character silences a room by sticking out both of his index fingers and shaking them at the air. So it kind of was a call. I know it wasn't an intentional call to that, but made me think of that. I love that scene, the way that he acted it, as far as, looking at his hand as if it had really betrayed him. It's not a quote, but I'll find myself pointing at things all week now and staring at my finger.
I'll begrudgingly allow it, mostly because since the story began,
you think Alice Cooper albums can be tied?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. Because that's the kind of guy I am. I have this loose moral relative flexibility on things, and so that's a problem. Also, the fact is the story rolled out, and it was Saul or Jimmy. I guess no, Gene. Gosh, Gene and his finger. And then you started to talk about Showgirls. I was concerned where it was going to end, so it ended in a much better place for me. So I will absolutely support your use of that, and I will. I think there was some super fun stuff with the Air Force guy. And that's actually where I'm going to pull my favorite quote of the week, and one that I will be using with sometimes which was, "Granted, some artistic license may have been taken," which I thought was a pretty awesome Saul-esque line. And so
that is.
All right, so we got our Kimometer somewhere between 50 and 55. We got our quotes. We did our recap. I think that's it for this week, unless you have anything else.
The only other thing I was going to add is, did you catch the music when Mike was initially playing with the transmitter?
No, I'm sorry.
It was kind of like a broken down version of the Breaking Bad theme.
Oh, cool. I don't know how I missed that, but very, very cool. A nice little Easter egg there. And they're saying,
and it quickly segues into a totally different theme after that. But it starts as sort of the Breaking Bad theme in like a slower, broken down version, and then as it picks up pace, it completely shifts gear.
Oh, excellent! I'll have to go back and re-listen to that. So Mike and I, and then hopefully soon Mel, will kind of continue to sort out schedule. Sort of think we'll stay on Wednesdays. We'll see. Got to work on everybody's schedules. There's some funky stuff coming up with me the next few weeks in terms of some travel that may or may not mess with that, but we'll throw it out on Twitter and Facebook and let folks know.
Tonight was mostly my fault because for anybody who's following, I did make a couple social media posts about it. I am in the process of moving into a new secret location where I'm hiding from the government. So that was my fault.
Way to totally destroy our Reading to Orphans cover, Mike, that people were totally buying.
That's right. I already completely forgot about that. We were reading to orphans. That's all that happened.
Totally
Don't look for me. Don't look for me, government.
We had them, but okay. And on that note, we're glad to be back. Thanks for anyone who watched live, and tell your friends. And hope to see more of you next week. So take care.
Thank you, guys.